I walked into my own funeral fundraiser while my son was standing on stage crying into a microphone. Behind him, a giant screen showed my face, pale and weak from a hospital photo taken 3 years earlier, with the words, "Help us give Dad his final goodbye," written in gold letters above it. 200 people sat at round tables, dabbing their eyes, believing I was dying alone in a medical bed somewhere. My daughter-in-law had placed an empty chair near the stage, with my old work jacket draped over it like I was already gone. My son was telling the room that my final wish was to be buried with dignity. Even though I had eaten a ham sandwich for lunch that same afternoon, I stood in the doorway wearing my old gray suit, holding my real medical records in one hand and a folder full of bank statements in the other. The room went silent before my son even saw me. Then somebody gasped and my son turned around. For the first time in years, he looked at me without asking for money. My name is Thomas Ellison. I am 73 years old, a retired paramedic from Dayton, Ohio, and I spent 38 years showing up on the worst day of other people's lives: car wrecks, heart attacks, house fires, overdoses, childbirths in gas station bathrooms, falls in icy driveways, strokes at Sunday breakfast, calls that started with panic and ended with silence. I learned early that a man's hands could shake later, but not during. During the emergency you worked, you breathed steady, you kept your voice low, you did not make the pain about yourself. That habit followed me home. My wife, June, used to say I carried grief in my pockets like loose change. She could hear it in the way I put my keys down at night. She could tell which calls had followed me home by whether I stood in the kitchen too long before speaking. June was a school secretary, the kind of woman who knew every child's allergy, every teacher's birthday, and every parent who needed kindness before paperwork. She was not loud, but the whole world became softer when she entered a room. We raised 2 children in a small brick house on Linden Avenue. Our son Michael was sharp, charming, and always reaching for something just beyond him. Our daughter Erin was quieter, more careful, always trying to keep peace, even when peace was just another word for silence. I loved them both the way fathers do, without measuring, without guarding myself, without imagining that one day love might need paperwork around it. Money was never easy. Paramedic pay looked noble in newspaper articles and small in bank accounts. June clipped coupons, packed lunches, and stretched every paycheck until it nearly tore. I worked holidays because holiday pay helped with school clothes. I took extra shifts because braces were not optional. I repaired our own roof because a contractor cost too much. I drove the same Ford pickup for 19 years because Michael needed tuition and Aaron needed textbooks. When Michael wanted to start a landscaping business at 26, I gave him $8,000 from a savings account. June and I had built for a trip to Yellowstone. He said he would pay it back by Christmas. Christmas came and went, so did the next one. And when his business failed, I did not mention the money. I told myself he was my son, not a customer. When Erin divorced and moved back home with her little boy for 6 months, June and I turned the sewing room into a bedroom and never once made her feel like a burden. That was family, I thought. You opened the door. June died 6 years ago from an aneurysm that gave us no warning and no chance to bargain. One minute she was standing at the sink rinsing strawberries, and the next she was on the floor while I did chest compressions on the woman I loved more than my own breath. I had saved strangers for decades. I could not save her. That kind of failure does not leave. It moves into the house and learns your schedule. After June was gone, I became useful in a different way. Michael called when he needed help with his mortgage. And then when his truck broke down, then when his wife, Kendra, said the kids needed private tutoring. Erin called less often, but when she did, it was usually because she was overwhelmed and short on rent or afraid to tell Michael. No, I helped because helping was the one part of fatherhood I still understood. The problem with being useful is that some people eventually stop seeing the person behind the usefulness. They do not ask if you are lonely. They ask if you can cover the bill by Friday. They do not notice your refrigerator is empty. They notice your credit limit. They do not ask how your knees feel in winter. They ask if you still have the good insurance for years. I told myself this was normal. Adult children struggle. Parents help, families bend. But there is a difference between bending and being folded into someone else's pocket. I learned that difference at my own funeral fundraiser. The first strange sign came on a Tuesday morning at Kroger. I was standing in the cereal aisle comparing prices like June had trained me to do. When Mrs. Alvarez from our old church saw me and froze, with a box of cornflakes in her hand. She looked at my face, then down at my legs, then back at my face as if she had seen a ghost wearing sneakers. She hugged me too hard and told me she was praying for a peaceful passing. I thought she had mixed me up with someone else. At 73, you get used to people talking about illness like weather. But then she started crying. She said the church was doing everything it could. She said Michael was so brave. She said no father should have to worry about funeral expenses while fighting for his life. Funeral expenses. I stood there with a coupon in my hand, hearing the blood move in my ears. I told her I was not dying. She blinked like I had embarrassed her. Then she said maybe Michael had not wanted me to know how bad things were. And she touched my arm with pity, the way people touch hospital blankets, and walked away. That afternoon I called Michael. He did not answer. I called Erin. She answered on the fourth ring and sounded nervous before I spoke. And I asked her why people at church thought I was dying. There was a pause long enough to tell me she knew something. Then she said Michael and Kendra had only asked for prayer because I had been having health issues. I had high blood pressure, a bad knee, and a scar from gallbladder surgery 3 years earlier. I was old, not terminal. 2 days later, a casserole appeared on my porch with a card that said, "May your final days be surrounded by love." The handwriting belonged to a woman from church who had once helped June organize the Christmas toy drive. I stood in the doorway with the foil-covered dish in my hands and felt something cold settle under my ribs. Then came the envelopes, cash and sympathy cards, small checks made out to Michael Ellison, and a grocery store gift card, a note from a retired firefighter who wrote that he wished he could give more but hoped it helped with my burial. Burial, the word sat on the page like dirt. I drove to the church the next morning. Pastor Raid had taken over after our old pastor retired, but he knew me well enough to greet me with both hands when he saw me walk into his office. And color left his face. He tried to smile, but the smile did not know where to land. On his desk was a stack of flyers. I saw my own picture before he could hide them. It was an old hospital photo. Michael had taken it after my gallbladder surgery, when I was still gray from anesthesia and too tired to argue about pictures. Someone had cropped it close, so I looked weaker than I had been. And across the top were the words Thomas Ellison Final Journey Fund. Under that, in smaller print, it said my family was raising money for end-of-life care, unpaid medical bills, and funeral arrangements. And there was a date for a charity dinner. There was a donation link. There was a QR code. There was a line that said, "Tom is too proud to ask, so we are asking for him. Too proud." And that was the part that nearly made me sit down. Pastor Reed looked sick. He said Michael had told him I was declining fast. He said Kendra had cried in his office. She had described medical debt, oxygen equipment, hospice preparation, and my desire not to be seen in my weakened state. She had said I was embarrassed by my condition and wanted privacy. She had said the family needed help to honor me properly. And it was a good lie, because it used pieces of truth. I was private. I was proud. I had been in the hospital once. June was dead. I lived alone. People were ready to believe a lonely old man might be quietly dying because that story made sense to them. And the truth was much uglier. My family had found a way to spend my death before I was finished living. I did not confront Michael that day. A younger man might have. A younger man might have driven straight to his house and pounded on the door and demanded to know when his son had started burying him for profit. But I had spent too many years in emergency services to mistake noise for control. The person who screams first often loses the room. The person who gathers facts owns it. So I asked Pastor Raid for a copy of the flyer. Then I asked for the donation records he had access to. He hesitated because shame and church politics can make good men slow. And I told him this was not a family misunderstanding. This was money being collected under a false medical claim, using my name and photograph. He gave me what he had. The amount already raised through the church was over $18,000. And the online campaign was worse. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and opened the donation page. My own face stared back at me from the screen, pale and helpless. Kendra had written the story. I knew because she had a way of making every sentence sound like it had been polished for applause. She described me as a beloved retired first responder facing a rapidly advancing condition. And she wrote that I had spent my life saving others and now needed others to help save my dignity. She wrote that medical bills had overwhelmed the family. She wrote that my final wish was to avoid leaving debt behind for my children. My final wish. I had never told them anything of the kind. The campaign had raised $46,000 online. Some donations came from people I had pulled from wrecked cars. And some came from former co-workers. Some came from parents at June's old school. A firefighter I had trained in the 1980s donated $500 and wrote that I had taught him how to stay calm when people were bleeding. A woman donated $25 and said I had held her mother's hand during a stroke call. 20 years earlier, I read every message. That was the worst part. The money hurt. But the kindness broke me. They had stolen more than dollars. They had stolen people as gratitude and aimed it at a lie. Then I saw the update video. Michael sat beside Kendra on their living room couch. Their lighting was soft. Their voices were low. Michael wiped his eyes as he thanked everyone for supporting Dad during this painful transition. Kendra leaned into him like a grieving daughter instead of the woman who had once complained that my house smelled like old coffee and medicine. Behind them on the wall, I noticed a new television, bigger than the one they had before. On Kendra's wrist was a bracelet I had never seen. Michael's truck, visible through the window for half a second, looked freshly detailed. I took screenshots, I downloaded the video, I saved the donation page as a PDF. I wrote down the names of donors I recognized. Then I drove to my doctor. Dr. Patel had been my physician for almost 12 years. And she was blunt, careful, and completely unimpressed by drama. When I explained what was happening, her face hardened in a way I had only seen once before, when an insurance company denied a test she wanted for me. And she printed my current medical summary. No terminal diagnosis, no hospice referral, no oxygen prescription, no unpaid hospital debt connected to any life-ending condition. She wrote a signed statement that I was medically stable, mentally competent, and not under end-of-life care. I put that document in a folder. Then I called my bank. That was when the betrayal deepened. The bank manager, Linda Watkins, knew me because June and I had opened our first joint account there in 1979. Linda had been a teller back then with feathered hair and red nails. Now she managed the branch and wore reading glasses on a chain. And when I asked whether anyone had recently tried to access my accounts, her friendly expression disappeared. She asked if I wanted to speak in her office. Michael had not accessed my account directly. He was smarter than that, but he had brought in a document 2 weeks earlier claiming I had authorized him to discuss medical expense coordination and family support transfers on my behalf. The signature was mine at first glance, but only at first glance. It looked copied from an old Christmas card, shaky in the wrong places, stiff where my hand was usually loose. Linda had refused it because it was not notarized and because Michael became irritated when she asked to call me. She had made a note in the system. She showed me the scan. Seeing my name forged by my own son did something to my body I cannot fully explain. It was not anger first, it was nausea. My stomach seemed to understand before my mind did. I asked for copies. Then Linda showed me something else. The checks from the church fundraiser had been deposited into an account called Ellison Family Care. It sounded noble, and it was not connected to me. Michael and Kendra had opened it as joint owners. The online campaign payouts had gone there too. I could not access their account, of course, but Linda could confirm incoming deposits from the fundraiser. And for outgoing details, I would need legal help, so I called Sandra Morris, an attorney I knew from years earlier when June and I updated our wills. And Sandra had a small office downtown, and the kind of voice that made foolish people wish they had chosen a different target. She listened without interrupting. Then she told me not to contact Michael yet, and she told me to preserve everything. She told me fraud involving charitable donations, elder exploitation, forged authorization, and false medical claims could become serious quickly. Serious was good. Serious meant the truth had somewhere to stand. Over the next week, I became a quiet man with a very organized folder. Pastor Reed gave me copies of church announcements, flyers, donor envelopes, and emails from Kendra describing my supposed decline. Dr. Patel gave me a signed medical statement. Linda gave me the forged authorization scan and her branch note. A retired coworker sent me the online campaign link and screenshots of Michael asking people to give before Dad runs out of time. Someone from church forwarded me a message where Kendra said I was too weak to come to the fundraiser, but hoped everyone would celebrate my life. Celebrate my life. They were planning a room full of grief without inviting the living man. And then my grandson Noah came to my house. Noah was 16, Michael's oldest boy, tall and thin with June's brown eyes. He had always been a quiet kid, the kind who noticed things adults assumed children missed. He stood on my porch after school with his backpack hanging from one shoulder and guilt all over his face. I made him hot chocolate because he still drank it when he was upset, though he pretended not to. He told me he had overheard his mother and father arguing. Kendra was angry because Michael had used part of the fundraiser money to catch up on truck payments. Michael was angry because Kendra had bought new furniture for the living room before the dinner, saying people would be coming by after, and the house needed to look respectable. Noah said they had also paid off a credit card, booked a trip to Florida for later in the year, and put a deposit on a kitchen remodel. He looked ashamed, telling me, as if the sins of adults could drip down onto children. Then he pulled a folded paper from his backpack. It was the program for the charity dinner. At the bottom, beneath my photograph and a quote about service, it said there would be a special video tribute from my family because I was too ill to attend. Noah's voice shook when he told me he had asked his dad if I was really dying. Michael had told him not to upset himself and not to bring it up with me because I was confused sometimes. Confused. That word is dangerous when placed near an old man. It does not need proof to start stealing his voice. I thanked Noah. I told him he had done the right thing. Then I called Sandra and said I was ready. The plan was not revenge. I need that understood. Revenge is when you want to hurt people because they hurt you. What I wanted was exposure, restitution, and a wall high enough that my son could never use my name as a ladder again. And Sandra moved fast. She contacted the online fundraising platform and sent notice that the campaign was allegedly fraudulent, attaching proof that I was alive, competent, and not under terminal care. And she prepared letters to preserve records from the church, the bank, and the platform. She contacted an investigator she trusted, a retired detective named Paul Mercer, who knew how to follow money without making a show of it. And Paul found enough in 3 days to make Sandra go quiet. Michael and Kendra had deposited over $64,000 in fundraiser money. Some remained in the account, much did not. And payments had gone to a truck loan, a credit card, a furniture store, a travel agency, a contractor, and a boutique where Kendra shopped when she wanted people to know she had shopped. There were no major medical payments connected to me. No hospice bills, no funeral home deposits, no pharmacy invoices, no home care services, nothing that matched the story they had sold. And the only funeral expense was a small deposit at a funeral home across town. That detail hurt differently. It meant they had done just enough to make the lie look real if anyone asked. And they had priced my burial like a prop. Sandra asked if I wanted law enforcement involved before the dinner, I said. Not yet. The dinner mattered because people deserved to see the truth in the same room where they had been asked to believe the lie. I had watched too many families handle wrongdoing behind closed doors only for the wrongdoer to rewrite the story later. Michael was charming. Kendra was polished if I confronted them privately. And by morning, I would be the confused old man who misunderstood a loving fundraiser. No, they had built a stage. I would use it in the days before the dinner. Michael finally came to see me. And he arrived with a bag of groceries and the nervous patience of a man visiting someone he hoped was weaker than him. He told me he was worried about my health. He told me people wanted to help. He told me I should not be embarrassed by needing support. He watched my face while he said it, searching for how much I knew. I played tired, not helpless tired. He glanced around my kitchen, and probably expecting unpaid bills, pill bottles, signs of decline. What he saw was a clean table, a half-finished crossword, and a folder turned face down. He asked what it was. I told him old paperwork. He reached for it without permission. I placed my hand on top of it. For a moment, father and son looked at each other across a table where I had once cut his pancakes into small squares. He smiled first. He said I was getting stubborn in my old age. Then he said Kendra had worked very hard on the dinner, and it would mean a lot if I did not make things difficult. And he said some people were coming from out of town. He said the money was already helping the family manage the stress of my situation. My situation, there was no illness in the room except greed. And then he said something I will never forget. He said that at my age, the details did not matter as much as making sure the family was taken care of. That was the main insult, though he spoke it softly. At my age, the details, the family, he had reduced my life to a funding event, my dignity to a detail, my death to a convenience that had arrived early enough to be useful. I asked him if he believed I was dying. And he looked at me for a long second and said, "We all were, eventually." That was when I knew there was no misunderstanding left to clear, only evidence. The charity dinner was held at the Mason Creek Banquet Hall, a place usually rented for retirement parties, wedding showers, and pancake breakfasts for volunteer firefighters. By 6 o'clock, the parking lot was full. Sandra and I sat in her car across the street while people walked in carrying envelopes, and gift baskets, and sympathy on their faces. I recognized so many of them, men I had worked night shifts with, women from June's school, church members who had brought soup after June died, and a young mother whose baby I had helped deliver in an ambulance during an ice storm 22 years earlier. They were not fools, they were kind that made what Michael and Kendra had done unforgivable in a way that money alone could not measure. And Sandra reviewed the folder one last time. Medical statement, campaign screenshots, donation records, bank letter, forged authorization, expense tracing, funeral home receipt, text messages, video transcript, NOS program, letters prepared for donors, notices ready for the platform and authorities. Everything had a tab, everything had a copy, everything had a place. And Pastor Raid entered ahead of us. He had insisted on being there, though I could tell shame was eating at him. He said he should have called me sooner. I told him yes, he should have. And forgiveness does not require pretending harm was smaller than it was. At 6:45, Kendra began the program. I watched from the hallway through a cracked door. She stood at the microphone in a black dress, and her voice soft and wet with practiced sorrow. She thanked everyone for surrounding our family during this sacred season. She said I had always been too proud to ask for help. She said the funds would ensure dignity and comfort and a proper goodbye. Michael stood beside her with his head bowed. Aaron sat at a front table, pale and miserable. Her son, Tyler, stared at his plate. Noah was not there. I had asked Sandra to make sure he did not have to witness the beginning. Then they played the video. Photos of me in uniform. Photos of June and me at church picnics. A picture of me holding Michael as a baby. A picture of me at Aaron's nursing school graduation. Then the hospital photo, slow piano music played underneath. Kendra had added captions about sacrifice, service, and final courage. And the room cried. I almost did too, but not for the reason they thought. It is a strange thing to watch people mourn a version of you created by liars. After the video, Michael took the microphone. His voice broke at exactly the right moments. He said I had taught him what it meant to be a man. He said I had always put family first. He said now it was the family's turn to put me first. And then he said the donations would help fulfill my final wish. That was my cue. Sandra opened the door. I walked in slowly, not because I was weak, but because the room needed time to understand what it was seeing. And conversations died table by table. A fork fell onto a plate. Someone whispered my name. A woman near the back covered her mouth. Pastor Reed stood. Aaron looked up and began to cry before I had taken 10 steps. Michael saw me last. He turned with the microphone still in his hand, and every rehearsed expression vanished. For 1 second, he was not a grieving son, not a family leader, not a man managing sympathy. He was a child caught with stolen money in both hands. I walked to the front of the room and stood beside the empty chair with my jacket draped over it. I picked up the jacket and put it over my arm and faced the people who had come to bury me with kindness. My voice did not shake. I told them I was not dying. Silence can be merciful or it can be a courtroom. And that night it was both. I began with the simplest truth. I was alive. I was medically stable. I was not in hospice. I had no terminal diagnosis. I had not requested funeral donations. And I had not authorized any campaign dinner or collection in my name. Then I held up Dr. Patel's signed statement and asked Pastor Reed to read the first paragraph aloud. He did. And his voice cracked when he reached the words mentally competent that mattered. I saw it land across the room. Michael had not only lied about my body, he had prepared the ground to question my mind. And Kendra stood and said this was not what it looked like. Sandra stepped forward then, calm as winter. She introduced herself as my attorney and stated that all documentation had been preserved, copied and prepared for appropriate review. Kendra sat back down. Then we showed the fundraiser page on the same screen they had used for my tribute video. My hospital photo appeared again, but this time it was surrounded by evidence, not music. Sandra read the campaign claims: rapidly advancing condition, end-of-life care, unpaid medical debt, funeral arrangements, and final wish. Then she placed beside those claims my medical records, my insurance statement, and confirmation that no such expenses existed. The room shifted. Grief turned into confusion, and confusion turned into anger. Michael tried to interrupt. He said he had only wanted to help. He said I had been proud and private. He said the family had been under emotional strain. I looked at him and told him to let the documents finish speaking. Sandra displayed the bank record next, the Ellison family care account, the deposits, the total raised, more than $64,000. And then the traced payments: truck loan, credit card, furniture store, travel agency, contractor deposit, boutique purchases, minimal funeral home deposit, no hospice, no home care. No medical equipment, no hospital balance, no oxygen, no nursing support, no debt in my name. A retired firefighter named Carl stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. He had donated $1,000 from his pension. And his wife pulled him gently back down, but his face said enough. Across the room, people began checking their phones, probably opening the campaign, reading the lies again with new eyes. And then came the forged authorization. Linda Watkins from the bank had agreed to attend. She did not enjoy public speaking, but she stood because truth sometimes needs uncomfortable witnesses. And she confirmed that Michael had attempted to present a document claiming authority to discuss my financial affairs. She confirmed the bank rejected it. And she confirmed the signature was questionable and that I had not been contacted before Michael's attempt. Michael's face had gone gray. Kendra started crying then, not from remorse, and from impact. Aaron stood slowly. My daughter looked smaller than I had ever seen her. She said she did not know about the forged paper. She said she believed Michael when he said I was worse than I admitted. And she said she had been afraid to question him because he said I would be humiliated if people knew. Her words did not clear her completely. Silence is not innocence, but her shame looked real, and that was more than Michael had given me. I looked at the room and told them the part that hurt most. I told them I had spent my life entering homes where people were scared, hurt, bleeding, dying, or alone. I had never once used someone's fear as an opportunity. My son had used theirs. He had used their love for me, their respect for June, their memories of my service, and their belief that family would not lie about death. No one moved. Then I turned to Michael. I told him he did not raise money for my funeral. He tried to rehearse a world where I was already too weak to object. And that was when he finally said he was sorry. But sorry spoken after exposure is not the same as truth spoken before consequence. Sandra announced that every donor would receive a letter with the evidence and refund instructions, and the online platform had been notified. The remaining funds would be frozen pending review. The church board would determine its own response, and law enforcement would receive copies of the forged authorization and financial records. And any money not refunded through proper channels would be pursued legally. Kendra whispered that this would ruin them. I looked at her and said nothing. That was the dignity she had not left me on her flyer. The aftermath did not feel like victory at first. It felt like cleaning glass after a window breaks. Even when the danger is gone, you keep finding sharp pieces in places you do not expect. The online campaign was suspended within 24 hours. Donors began receiving notices. Some got refunds through the platform. Others were repaid through funds recovered from the Ellison family care account. And not all the money was still there, which meant Michael and Kendra had to repay the difference under a legal agreement Sandra negotiated before prosecutors made their own decisions. And I did not protect them from consequences. I also did not need to feed them to the town for sport. The truth was already public enough. The church removed Michael from the finance committee, where he had no business serving in the first place. Kendra stepped down from the Women's Outreach Group before they could ask her to their names, once spoken with admiration, and became names people lowered their voices around. That kind of shame is heavy because it has to be carried into grocery stores, school pickup lines, and Sunday pews. Michael lost 2 landscaping clients when they found out he had used a dying father's story to pay personal bills. Kendra's sister stopped speaking to her after learning part of the money had gone toward furniture she had bragged about online. The contractor canceled the kitchen remodel deposit after Sandra sent notice that the funds were disputed. The travel agency refunded what it could and documented the rest. Then came the family consequences. I removed Michael as my emergency contact, financial backup, and successor on every document that mattered. I changed my medical directive, I changed my will, I changed account beneficiaries. I changed the locks. Not because I thought Michael would break in, but because symbolic acts matter when someone has treated your life like public property. Erin came to see me first, and she sat at my kitchen table, the same place where June used to peel apples, and cried into her hands. She did not ask for forgiveness. That helped. And she admitted she had known something was wrong but had chosen not to look closely because looking closely would require action. She said Michael had always been easier to obey than challenge. And I told her I understood fear, but understanding fear did not erase damage. She asked what she could do. I told her to start telling the truth before someone else had to drag it into the light. And to her credit, she did. She called donors she knew personally. She apologized without explaining it away. She helped Pastor Reed organize refund paperwork. She took her name off anything connected to the fundraiser. And slowly, painfully, she became useful in the way an honest person is useful, not by fixing the past, but by refusing to keep lying for it. Michael waited 12 days before coming over. He looked bad, not sick, stripped. There is a difference. His charm had lost weight. He stood on my porch with red eyes and no prepared speech. I let him inside because he was still my son. But I did not offer coffee because some comforts should not be automatic. He said he had not meant for it to go that far. He said it started as a way to cover medical costs. He assumed I would eventually have. He said Kendra pushed the dinner. He said the money got mixed together. He said he was under pressure. He said he was ashamed. I listened until he ran out of softer names for theft. Then I told him the truth. He had not made one mistake. He had made a series of choices that required planning, performance, and the cooperation of his own cowardice. He had chosen the photo. He had approved the words. He had accepted donations. He had deposited checks. He had tried to access my bank. He had let people mourn me while I was alive. He began to cry when I said that last part. I did not enjoy it. A father does not enjoy seeing his son broken. Even when the son brought the hammer himself, I told Michael I loved him. Then I told him love would no longer come with access to my money, my documents, my reputation, or my silence. If he wanted a relationship, it would be built with time, restitution, therapy, honesty, and no shortcuts through pity. He nodded, but I could see he had hoped for a quicker mercy. Quick mercy is often just permission renamed. No stayed close. I made sure he knew he was not responsible for saving me, even though his courage helped. Teenagers should not have to become the conscience of adults. But I also told him that doing the right thing while scared is the beginning of becoming a man worth trusting. He cried. When I said that, so did I 6 months after the charity dinner. I returned to Mason Creek Banquet Hall. This time there was no funeral flyer, no staged photograph, no empty chair with my jacket over it, no piano music under borrowed grief. The banner above the stage read June Ellison Community Care Fund. Sandra helped me set it up with the recovered money that donors refused to take back and a portion of my own savings. The fund was simple. It helped elderly people with real medical transportation, prescription costs, home safety repairs, and legal protection against financial exploitation. I wanted June's name on it because she had spent her life noticing people before they had to beg. The first person we helped was Mrs. Alvarez, the same woman who had hugged me in Crozier and told me she was praying for my peaceful passing. And her furnace had been failing for 2 winters, and she had been sleeping under 3 blankets because she did not want to burden her children. When we paid for the repair, she cried and apologized for believing the fundraiser, and I told her kindness was not the sin. The sin belonged to the people who aimed her kindness at a lie. That sentence became something I repeated often. Kindness was not the sin. I needed to believe it too. For a while after the dinner, I became suspicious of every casserole, every phone call, every envelope, every soft voice asking if I was okay. Betrayal makes generosity look dangerous, and it makes love feel like a contract with missing pages. I had to learn slowly that guarding my dignity did not require locking out every good person. Pastor Raid and I rebuilt our friendship carefully. He never excused himself that mattered, he admitted. He had been moved by Michael's emotion and failed to verify facts. In return, I admitted. I had been too proud to stay connected after June died, which made it easier for lies to grow in the empty spaces around me. Neither truth erased the other. Both needed saying. Erin became part of my life again, but not in the old way. She stopped using me as the quiet solution to every crisis. She came by on Sundays with groceries she paid for herself. Sometimes she cleaned without announcing it like a performance. And sometimes she sat with me on the porch and talked about June. Once, she told me she had been angry at me for being strong after Mom died because it made everyone else feel allowed to fall apart. I told her I had not been strong. I had been trained. There is a difference. Michael's road was harder. He paid restitution every month. And he attended counseling because Sandra made it part of our family agreement if he wanted contact with me outside legal settings. At first, his apologies sounded like speeches then. After a while, they became shorter, better, less polished. One day, almost a year after the dinner, he came to my garage while I was fixing a loose hinge on an old cabinet. And he watched me work for a few minutes and then said he had used my goodness as cover for his weakness. That was the first thing he said that sounded like truth without makeup. I did not hug him that day. And not because I wanted to punish him, but because my arms were not ready to lie. Instead, I handed him a screwdriver and told him to hold the hinge straight. We worked in silence. And for us, that was a beginning. Kendra and I remained distant. Some people are sorry they were caught, sorry they lost status, sorry the room saw them clearly. That may someday grow into real remorse. But I do not build my peace on someday. I am polite to her at school events for the grandchildren. I do not give her money. I do not leave her alone with my papers. Boundaries are not bitterness. They are the fence around what survived. Noah graduated high school the following spring. At his ceremony, he found me in the bleachers and waved with both hands. Michael was there. Erin was there. Kendra was there. For once, nobody asked me to sit in the back, stay quiet, pretend, pay, or disappear. I sat where Noah saved me a seat wearing the same gray suit I had worn to the charity dinner. And not because I had nothing else, because that suit had walked into a room where people thought my story was already written, and reminded them the author was still alive after the ceremony. And Noah hugged me and whispered that he was glad I had walked in that night. I told him I was too. Sometimes I think about the empty chair they placed near the stage. I think about my jacket draped over it, and my photograph glowing above it, my son telling people I wanted dignity while stripping mine in public. For a long time, that memory burned. Now it teaches. It reminds me that dignity is not something your family gives you, and it is something you protect even from people who share your name. I still live in the brick house on Linden Avenue. June's roses still grow badly along the fence because I never prune them right. My knees still hurt when rain comes. I still wake early, still drink coffee too strong, still keep my paramedic badge in the top drawer of my dresser, but I no longer answer every call like an emergency. Not every crisis belongs to me. Not every debt is love. Not every child who says dad is asking as a son. Some evenings I sit on the porch and watch the neighborhood settle into dusk. Cars pull into driveways, dogs bark, porch lights come on. Life keeps moving with no concern for the damage done inside families that used to make me sad. Now it comforts me. It means one betrayal, even a deep one, does not get to become the whole world. My family raised money for my funeral while I was still alive, so I walked into their charity dinner breathing. And when the room went silent, I finally understood something. I wish I had known years earlier a father can love his children with his whole heart and still refuse to be buried by their greed. I did not lose my family that night. I found out which parts of it were still alive.